Look familiar? Yeah. 1,000 pages for the NASM material. Chances are not all of it's created equal. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to help you guys stay focused on the 5 most important, but also probably most challenging concepts to grasp, so that as you are setting out to study and get through and master the material that's involved in the NASM certification, you know where to spend the most time and also how to approach the material as you go on and get into training. Coach Joe Drake with the Axiom Fitness Academy, and after we've worked with hundreds and thousands of students in the last 5 years to go through and help them get through the NASM material, 5 things really stick out to us as far as the most important concepts for you guys to really stay focused on and spend more time on as you're going throughout this process. And the first of those is understanding that the nervous system is the master regulator of almost everything else, right? I know that's a broad concept, but thinking about the nervous system as the master regulator, because as you guys go through your material, I want to use some terms that probably have popped up for you. The human movement system, right? HMS for short. The human movement system is comprised of our muscular system, right? Our muscles, the anatomy. We have our neurological system, and we have our skeletal system. And that neurological system, right? This nervous system as our master regulator is a really important piece of that. Not only if we have some broken bones or we have strained muscles, is that going to impact the other? But the reality of it is for a lot of clients as they come in, the benefit of stabilization, even in the OPT model, is training the neurological system. Whether people have had previous injuries or maybe they just haven't exercised before, that neurological piece is going to be really, really important. And truthfully, I also think it's what makes NASM unique. So I'm glad that you guys are watching this video. I'm glad that you guys chose a more challenging certification. But that being said, it's kind of a tough concept to get. And there are a lot of things that start to spiderweb out from it. So as you guys are diving in and saying, okay, well, Joe, what do I focus on then? I do think you need to have kind of the larger hierarchy in your mind, right? Understanding that our nervous system is broken down into not only our central and our peripheral, right? Those different components of our nervous system, but also even breaking down even further into understanding, okay, well, what's the difference between my somatic nervous system and my autonomic nervous system? Autonomic being more of those automatic processes in the body we don't want to think about happening, and the somatic being more of our motor response. And then from that as well, right? What's the difference between my sympathetic and my parasympathetic nervous system? Because honestly, that has a lot to do with training and exercise. Exercise is a stressor, right? Physiological stressors, all these things that activate our sympathetic nervous system, and then all the amazing things that happen inside of the body. So there is this kind of bigger picture I want you guys to keep in mind of these different components. I wouldn't get so caught up into memorizing all the different nerves, but just knowing these different components of the nervous system and having a good general working knowledge of how they function and how they all work together. And as you think about it, really the nervous system, not only is it the way we're bringing in information, but it's also how we're creating responses, we're creating contractions to actually exercise, right? Those 3 primary functions of your nervous system, as we think about it, right? Information, we want bringing in, proprioception, you guys can use the terminology. And then we had that integrative component, deciphering what it actually means. And that ends up being an important element of the whole training process, right? Training your body not to just bring in information, but that also actually decipher and figure out what it means and then create the appropriate motor response. Those 3 primary functions of the nervous system, really important to keep in mind, because even as we get into a couple of the other concepts that we have here inside this video, right, like the OPT model and understanding things like overactive and underactive muscles, the nervous system is this master regulator that's making it all happen. And from the exercise standpoint, the last thing that I would say is just knowing that like this is the text messaging system, or I'll give you guys my crude example. I'm honestly not that great with technology, computers, but I think about it this way. I've had a lot of different laptops over time, right? And they had their different technological pieces, things inside of them. But the thing that I've noticed the biggest difference on is ones that have a more robust processor. How many things can they handle at once? So your nervous system is like that, right? You might have these different components you're adding to your computer. Think about your muscles as more of like the hardware, right? The actual pieces that make up the computer. And then you have the processor, you have these other internal pieces that are making it all work. And so that's really how our nervous system functions. Not only are we sending these signals right down the alpha motor neurons to the actual muscle fibers to cause depolarization and excitation, contraction coupling, all this stuff that you guys are learning, right? But it's an electrical signal. It's how we send those. And the cool thing is that can get better. That is trainable, right? So I think focusing on the fact that your nervous system is this master regulator also keeps in mind that training is about more than muscles and calories. it's also about training the nervous system. And I think that's a piece that if you can keep in your mind, not only is it going to help you with understanding other concepts inside the NASM material, but as you get out into the gym, it's going to make sure that you're appropriately introducing things to your clients and you're not just throwing them into the weeds. The second of our most challenging, but also probably the most important concepts inside the NASM material as you guys are preparing for your exam is the concept of muscular leverage and what we call arthrokinematics, which has a lot to do with just joint motion. And the underlying concept here is the fact that our skeletal system, one of the primary purposes it serves as a lever system, right? It is the lever system that our muscles pull off of. And this is kind of like a complex, we start to get into like biomechanics and physics, but this is what we do as coaches and trainers. It is literally forces of the body. And everything in the human body, it's all about torque, right? Rotational forces. No matter what we do, what joint we're working with, we may do motions like pushing and pulling, but they only happen because of the segmental rotation that we have happening throughout. And as you guys get into this chapter, it's easy to get caught up on the three separate lever systems. We have first class, second class, and third class levers. Hey, if you had physics, good for you. This is probably easy stuff for you. But they do give you guys some good examples in the material of just understanding. First off, the most important piece is almost all of the major joints in the human body are going to be third class levers. Very few examples of first and second class. First class lever, they give you guys an example. This is like a seesaw, right? I got little kids, boom, we hang out rocking on the seesaw. You've got weights on both ends of this pivot point. Not very common in the human body. One of those would be our head and skull, right? And the way our muscles sit on one side, the weight of our head sits on the opposite, and they kind of sit on top of the cervical spine. So because of that, that's one of the very few first class lever systems. The only one example is going to be our second class lever at the ankles. This is actually a really interesting one I find because I know growing up in the bodybuilding world, everyone talking about, man, Joe, it's so hard for me to grow my calves. Like I just want bigger calves. And I'm like, yeah, me too, all right? It doesn't matter how many I do. But the reality of it is that we're actually extremely strong at this point. I'll also give you my other piece. I grew up on a farm. So moving a wheelbarrow around, hopefully you can picture a wheelbarrow. We got handles on one side, we got bricks, whatever in the middle, and then you've got your axis of rotation, that wheel. You can move something very heavy without a lot of force because you have what we call leverage, right? Doesn't exist a lot in the human body, but it does exist in the foot and the ankle based upon the fact that we have our actual muscle insertion point further along than the actual weight of our body, and then we have our toes here that act as that, axis of rotation. So it may be hard for you guys to picture, but just know, oh wow, Joe said that's why I'm so strong here. It's because it's actually a second class lever system. Most of them are going to be third class levers, which is actually pretty mechanically inefficient, all right? So without getting too deep into the concept of torque, torque equals force times resistance arm, right? This is the forces of the human body. If I'm doing a bicep curl, you can think of my elbow as the axis of rotation, right? Pretty easy for you guys to picture. Now my tendon insertion point, right, where my bicep tendon comes in, it's very close, very, very close to that joint. So the distance between my actual elbow and my bicep insertion, very tiny. That means my lever is very short, all right? That's not good. That's not good for creating force, all right? It means that this long lever, when I have a dumbbell sitting in my hand, I can have a 10-pound dumbbell, right? Not very heavy, but because I have this really long lever, it's creating a lot of force downward. So the reality of it is, this is actually why free weights are so great as far as overloading the body, because we don't need that much weight based upon torque and lever systems. So I don't want to dive too much into it in this video, but if you guys are interested, there's some great stuff out there searching and understanding torque and lever systems. But just keep in mind, most of the joints in the human body are going to be third class levers, and this is really important because this does allow us to better understand how we overload. And the last thing that I'm going to say about arthrokinematics and joint motion and how lever systems fit in is it's also all about range of motion, right? You think about an exercise and how we progress. Well, if I want there to be more torque, let's say I'm doing a core exercise and I have my hands in nice and tight. Well, the distance here is pretty small. And Joe said force times resistance arm, if it's a small resistance arm, it's not going to generate as much torque on my core. I'm going to feel stronger. If I get further away, greater range of motion, it's going to require more muscular force through my torso. So your understanding of this stuff can also help you appropriately regress and progress exercises as you guys get into working with clients. Concept number 3, truly understanding overactive versus underactive muscles. And we've got some other great videos here on our YouTube channel that actually give you the specifics and break down overactive and underactive muscles for some of your assessments like your overhead squat, your push-pull assessment, even your static postural assessments. So check those videos out for the specifics, but more so just understanding the fact that overactive and underactive, it's more than just being tight and weak, right? When we think about certain compensations in the assessments, that something's tight and it's pulling me in a certain direction. Well, it's actually called hypertonic, right? Because if it was just tight, we would think, oh, maybe I just like stretch it. And oftentimes that's not gonna work, because what we actually have with overactive muscles is we have a little bit of muscle tone, or maybe too much signal going from our brain and our nervous system to that muscle. And I'll give you guys a quick example to kind of bring all this together. Let's say, very common, maybe a lot of your clients or some of your clients, like they work in a seated position at a desk, or they're in a car driving around for sales all day. Great, awesome. So because of that, they get into this position where they go to stand up, and what we feel this feeling of like maybe tightness in the hip flexors. That could be related to back pain. It's more than the hip flexor just being tight. Because I was in that shortened position, my brain is now keeping just a little bit of contraction in that rectus femoris, in the psoas, those hip flexors themselves. Now what happens there when we have that overactive muscle, and this is why it's so important, even from a training standpoint, is that if we have a little bit of signal there, not only do I have some overactivity, but because of that concept, right, terms you guys know, reciprocal inhibition, what happens to my functional antagonist, my glutey booty, right, the glutes? They don't totally get shut off, right? You'll read out there on the internet like, oh, your glutes are turned off. They're not turned off. Otherwise, you'd walk around in a weird way. They just might not be firing optimally, and that does happen, right? So all of a sudden, I got these overactive hip flexors, maybe a little bit of inhibition going to my glutes neurologically, and then I get out into the gym, and I start doing exercises, and I throw a bar on my back, and I'm squatting. And there's a certain point in time in that squat when my glutes are supposed to be strong. And because of this overactive-underactive relationship, maybe they're not, and then what happens? I start complaining of back pain. This is a cycle that people get into. So our understanding of overactive and underactive goes beyond just trying to foam roll and stretch exercises, which are going to be appropriate and a part of the process, but also understanding what's the opposition. If we have overactivity, where is the underactivity? And then how can I appropriately strengthen those muscles? And if you do that, you take it from more of the strengthening approach, I promise, aside from just doing well on your exam with understanding overactive and underactive, you're going to be doing your clients a great service when you get out into the gym. Concept number 4 that actually spans a pretty significant chunk of your guys' NASM exam, and again, quite a bit of what you'll do as a coach, is the concept of progression. And the section that I'm referring to is specifically section 5 in your guys' materials. Each of those chapters starts to get into level 1, 2, and 3 progressions. And you'll actually find a lot of videos on those specific concepts here on our YouTube channel for some more visuals. But the idea of it is the important part, understanding that there is an appropriate way to introduce new exercises. Because if you're anything like me, as you got into coaching and training, or you're in this phase of becoming a coach and trainer, when I thought of progression, I just thought of like reps and sets and weights and rest periods. And these are important acute variables that you guys learn about inside your material, but actual exercise selection is part of the progression process, right? How much my brain, my body has to process all at one time will vary from exercise to exercise. And so one of the best things you guys can do at this stage is start to look at even your strength training, right? Let's keep it very simple. Something like squatting. And start to look at all the squat variations you can possibly think out and try to order them from like the simplest to the most complex. Or the easiest, if you had a brand new person who's never worked out a day in their life, like how would you start them? And slowly over time, how would you get them to say something like a back squat? And that's this concept of progression that we're talking about. And what you'll find is these little patterns emerge, especially as you start to look at and you watch the videos that break down level 1, 2, and 3 progressions. It all starts to make more sense. This will not only help you a lot on your exam, as I can tell you from someone who retakes the exam on a yearly basis, that these level 1, 2, and 3 progressions in section 5 come up a lot, and they're very easy to get right, and they're very easy to get wrong. But I also really believe, from a coach who's worked with thousands of clients over 16 years, this is also a really valuable concept that a lot of coaches and trainers miss out on. And you do want to bring people on this fun, experiential, long-term journey in training, but you want to make sure that you introduce moves along the way in the right order so that you set them up for success along the way. Number 5 probably should come as no surprise to you if you've watched enough videos here on the tube and you've gone through your materials, and that is mastering and really understanding how to apply the OPT model, the Optimum Performance Training Model. And oftentimes we get questions of like, how does this really fit into everything, Joe? And the truth is this is the foundation of NASM's approach towards coaching and training. And if you look across other organizations and ways to look at programming, they may have a different way of talking about it, but oftentimes it's the same thing. It's all about where do we start people out and how do we bring them along over time based on their goals, based on their levels of experience, based on their personality, all the things that are going to go into it. And so thankfully for you, we have some pretty detailed videos here already on the OPT model of variables, reps, sets, rests, volume, intensity. You need to know all those things because as you are programming and working with clients in the gym, those things should match where they want to be. But this is also really important because just a lot of things circle around your understanding of the OPT model. And that's where even for our students who work with us in our virtual courses and here in South Florida with our live courses, we introduce the OPT model on day 1 because I know everything else builds on top of it. And it truly does take a while to understand how do I really start to create these progressive resistance training programs for people. And then as you guys get into your actual programming chapters within NASM, you're like, wait a minute, you can do undulating, you can mix these variables together, right? The deeper down the rabbit hole you get, the more complicated it seems. But the key here, master the OPT model from the start, really focus on understanding those individual phases. And the key to really understanding it is putting it to use on yourself. And that's what a lot of our students do really well and get a lot out of is saying, hey, especially the stuff that's more foreign to me, things like stabilization and how all these things fit together, you got to start to apply it on yourself right away. So if you haven't watched it already, check out our video on the OPT model for all the individual variables and just know that this is an overarching concept that a lot of other things are going to circle back to when it comes to your exam. I know there's a lot to handle and there's a lot of things you're trying to digest as you guys are becoming NASM certified personal trainers, but hopefully this video served you guys and just staying focused on some of the most important concepts. I find oftentimes as you're going through and searching for these things, some of the stuff we talked about in this video you probably already knew was important, but maybe not some of the individual variables. So as you get closer and closer to test time, make sure these 5 concepts come back into your mind. And also, especially try to focus on, don't just memorize them so you forget them when it comes to the exam, but the 5 things we brought up in this video, really try to challenge yourself, right? I say challenge yourself because that's what we exist for. Not just getting people certified, but going on and becoming a great coach and trainer, which is I know what you want if you're still watching this video. Challenge yourself to apply these things as much as possible throughout your study process. First off, it's gonna make it a lot more fun because this in the gym stuff is why you started this whole process in the first place, and it's gonna be what you put to use when you're out there in the real world. So I hope you guys continue to get value from these videos. If you do, don't forget, hit the like button somewhere, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're committed to just putting out more great content so we can see more coaches and trainers like you get into the industry and change lives.